and you have to put a little gotted beside that little yoke that tells you recording is in progress. So can we just start then, and can I ask Imelda, followed by Cameron, followed by Aidan, followed by Anna, followed by Jacinta to introduce themselves. Where's Imelda gone? She was there a minute ago. Well, we'll go to Cameron. We'll come back to her. Cameron, followed by Aidan.
Perfect. Hi, folks. So my name is Cameron. I'm the chairperson of Amok LGBT. So I'm on the Social Inclusion Linkage Group for GCCN.
Thanks. Aidan.
Yep. How you doing? My name is Aidan Hart, and I coordinate the University of Sanctuary Initiative at NUI Galway, and I'm on the Social Inclusion Linkage Group for the GCCN.
Anna and Jacinta, and then Katie.
Anna, I'm with Citywide Drugs Crisis Campaign, a network of community-based organisations trying to respond to the drugs issue. So great to be.
Thanks. Hi, I'm Jacinta. I'm the development worker with Galway City Community Network.
Hi, I'm Katie. I am the community development worker in Galway Traveller Movement.
Then Martin, followed by Sarah Ferrigan, followed by Paul Kernan and Laurie Wheelahan. We can't.
Was I first? Was I? Sarah, my name is Sarah, and I'm with the Clare Public Participation Network.
Grant. Thanks, Sarah. Paul.
Yeah, my name is Paul Kernan, and I'm concerned that nobody's actually voiced their concerns. So we're not following orders.
Well, it's not an order. The idea was to put it into the chat, Paul, because it would take a bit too long. So we go to Laurie, and then to Anne Nolan, and then to Seamus Diskin.
Laurie Wheelhan, a development worker in Wicklow, and I work currently on the PsyCap programme.
Hi everyone, Anne Nolan, Waterford Integration Services, Inclusion and Diversity Programme Lead.
Hi, I'm Seamus Diskin. I'm with the Galway Anti-Racism Network.
Miriam, and then Thomas Erbslow, and then Catherine Lynch.
Hi, I'm Miriam, and I'm the National Coordinator of the National Collective of Community-Based Women's Networks. So it's 17 women's community development projects around the country.
Thomas, then Catherine, and then Deirdre Grealish. Thomas, we didn't hear from you, man. I can only see the top of your head, but maybe that's my computer. You're muted, Thomas. You're muted. You're still muted. I'll keep going. I can't hear Thomas. He's muted.
Okay.
Catherine.
No.
Everyone's talk.
Oh, sorry about all of that. I thought I'd unmuted myself. Thomas Erbslow, I'm development worker with the Traveller Visibility Group in Cork, but I'm here in like personal capacity as a member of the Community Workers Co-op or Community Work Ireland. And I have to leave at 2 o'clock. My apologies for that.
That's grand. We're keeping going quick. Catherine, then Deirdre Grealish, and then Karen Galligan.
Right, also personal, Thomas. So as a person, my name is Catherine Lynch. Professionally, I pop up in all kinds of positions and all kinds of places with all kinds of roles, but always with the purpose of promoting equality and human rights. So happy to be here. Good to see you. Done, Stacia.
And Deirdre, and then
I'm Deirdre Grealish, and I'm from Tribes Basketball Club in Galway City.
Karen, and then Sharon.
I'm Rethink Ireland, and I manage the Equality Fund.
Good to see you, Karen. Sharon.
I'm Sharon, and I'm one of the local coordinators of one of those 17 projects of the NCCWN based in Swan in Dunleary.
And then Islamaya, I can't see you, but
that's Islamaya.
Islamaya, do you want to say who you are?
Yes, sorry. I just guess I'm just on time.
Great.
This is Islamia. So
great.
I work for AMDAF and GoCom Radio.
Thank you. And then Kathleen Rader.
Hi, my name is Caitlin, and I'm managing the Think Equality Donegal project.
Okay, now, is there anyone who hasn't spoken? Because I think I skipped over one or two. John Martin.
Well, as I said, with that introduction, you have caught me completely off guard. I would have having to write down and give them priority. So I try and give them priority. I'm on the retired members groups and committees for the Force Union, which is associated with the Congress of Trade Unions and all the other trade unions and retired members. I am on the Chapel Lizard Residents Association. We set up a company there recently, Chapel Lizard for Sustainability and Democracy, because we're taking Dublin City Council to the High Court, and we're going to use the company on the issues of sustainability and democracy, dealing directly with Dublin City Council and with the other agencies. As I said, I'm in the housing campaign, the climate campaign, and I think that's enough to be going on with at the moment.
Thanks very much, John. That'll keep us going. And can I remind everyone to put their concern into the chat, and maybe hand over to Anne, please.
Good, thank you very much. I am really like this.
Oh, I forgot to ask Anne and Rachel to introduce themselves.
Oh.
Sorry, Rachel, I did see you somewhere though.
I'm here, yeah. Thanks, Stacia. I'm Rachel Doyle and I'm Joint National Coordinator of Community Work Ireland.
Sorry, Anne, back to you.
That's okay. And my name is Anne Urban and I'm the other Joint Coordinator of Community Work Ireland. And I've literally put together the most basic of basic slides just to set the scene for the conversation. So I'm just going to share those now. Beginning, and this is not stuff that you all know. This stuff, this is not new in any way, shape or form, but just to remind ourselves that the Equality Acts that we're currently talking about in relation to the review, the equality legislation promotes discrimination in employment, goods and services, accommodation and education on 9 grounds. I won't go through them, but increasingly we refer to socioeconomic ground as the 9+1 grounds, and I think that's important just to state for our conversation. The Equal Status Act prohibits discrimination in the provision of accommodation services against people who are in receipt of any type of rent supplement or HAP, and I think it's important to remind ourselves of that because sometimes we forget that. It also prohibits, subject to some exemptions, so the equality legislation prohibits discrimination subject to some exemptions, including indirect discrimination, discrimination in effect, and discrimination by association. It prohibits sexual harassment and victimization, and discriminatory advertising. The Employment Equality Act provides for equal pay, positive action, like the Equality Act allows for positive action to promote equality or to cater for the special needs of persons, and reasonable accommodation. The Equality Acts require the reasonable accommodation of people with disabilities, and there are different standards in different acts. Just to say that I took all of this from FLAC, from the FLAC stuff that they have been that they have produced as part of this review. So just thanks to them for that. So in terms of the review process, it was actually in June 2021 that the Minister for Children, Equality, Disability, Integration and Youth, Roderick O'Gorman, announced a comprehensive review of the Equality Acts. It'll consider Ireland's 2 primary pieces of equality legislation, so the Employment Equality Acts and the Equal Status Act, but it will also consider other legislation relating to the promotion of equality and Ireland's anti-discrimination framework. So look at things like, for example, the Workplace Relations Act, the Intoxicating Liquor Act, and the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission Act 2014, which provides for the public sector equality and human rights duty, which is a really critical one, I think, for us in this type of work. The review of the Equality Acts is hugely important. Again, this is taken from FLAC, but I think it speaks to us. It's a hugely important opportunity for all groups and individuals who are concerned with promoting equality and combating discrimination. And the current consultation process provides the opportunity to set the agenda for the review. And I suppose some of you will have engaged with IREC and FLAC have I suppose combined to try to involve civil society as much as possible in the review. And some of you will have engaged with some of the events that they have been organising. And I suppose from their perspective and from our own perspective, civil society has had long, as Stacia outlined at the start, a long history of working to achieve a more equal society. and our own vision for a more equal society must inform the review process, and the review must reflect how discrimination and inequality is experienced if it's to be effective. And I think I would agree that the success of the ongoing consultation depends on the voice of civil society being heard, and not only being heard, but being responded to. So according to the Minister's Office, then the purpose of the review is to take stock. The equality legislation has been there for 20 years. It's the first time there's ever been a comprehensive review, so it's well, timely or even overdue. And the review process will examine several important matters in relation to the legislation, including things like how well the Equality Acts are working and how effective they are at promoting equality and combating discrimination. And those of us who can think back over the years would probably say they're in no way as effective as they once were. How aware people who experience inequality and discrimination are of the legislation, whether the 9 protected grounds under the Acts covers everyone who experiences discrimination, and whether more grounds should be added. The review will specifically examine the introduction of a socioeconomic status ground. So I think Niall and others, the work over many, many years may finally pay off in that regard. Whether the existing 9 grounds cover everyone, they should, and this will include an examination of the definitions of the gender and disability grounds, and whether the legislation protects people who are discriminated against on a combination of grounds. So that whole notion of intersectional discrimination, that there is a feeling that that is not adequately reflected or covered. And the exemptions to where the prohibition on discrimination in the equality legislation apply, and whether some of these exemptions should be changed or removed. Then the last 2, whether there are barriers to stop people asserting their rights under the Acts, and you might go, yeah, there are, including by making discrimination complaints, and the use of non-disclosure agreements when discrimination cases are settled. So some of the discussions about this have gotten very much into the sort of the legal aspects of this. But I think if we can maybe just focus on the issues as they pertain to us, I think that would be really useful. And then just very finally, the deadline for submissions was supposed to be the end of this month. There has been a slight extension to Wednesday, the 8th of December, 2021. So just to bear that in mind, if you're making your own submission, that the deadline is the 8th of December. And I think part of today is about looking to discuss what should be in submissions generally from all of our different organisations, and then certainly to inform what will go into the CWI submission. Okay, that's me. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Anne, and thanks for that very useful and rapid reminder of the areas that need to be looked at, like effectiveness, awareness, other categories, other areas that should be included, and those awful exemptions, which I'm suddenly reminded of from the dim and distant past that still are stuck there, as well as the ongoing barriers and a few more that have been thrown in along the way. So Niall, it's over to you then. And as Anne says, the whole purpose of today is to ensure that everybody has information with which to inform your own submission, and also, of course, that CWI has a basis on which to develop a national submission on behalf of CWI. So feel free to make any suggestions you wish. So Niall.
Unmute. Thanks very much, Stacia, and thanks for the kind introduction earlier. What I was hoping to do, and hopefully it's of relevance, is first of all, set out why it might be important to engage, why an overburdened and under-resourced sector should take time and find time, I suppose, to engage in this process as well, and to give it some context in terms of where this has come from, and hopefully then maybe provide 1 or 2 pointers as to where it might usefully go to. All right, and I agree with the idea of looking at the more civil society issues rather than the legal issues, but I think there's some marrying of the two maybe that could happen as well that might be usefully and important. So just, I suppose, to start in terms of if we're looking at the issue of equality, that's central to our understanding of equality is that it's not just concerned with opportunities, but it's also concerned with outcomes, and outcomes for the groups that currently experience inequality. It's focused on access to and outcomes in relation to resources for groups that are subject to inequality, but but it's also focused on representation and access to and outcomes in relation to influence and decision-making for these groups. And it's further focused on recognition and access to and outcomes in relation to status and standing for one's identity and diversity. And it's also concerned with respect and access to and outcomes in relation to relationships of care, respect, and solidarity. And I suppose when we put it in these terms of resources, representation, recognition, and respect, equality is more than just an ambition for society. It's an imperative for a better society and a better society for all. And I think as we've experienced in recent times, it's even more of an imperative when we're in the midst of crisis. And we are currently in the midst of a crisis. And I think with climate change facing us, we're facing into future times of crisis. So I think we need to be concerned with progressing equality with some urgency in the current context. I believe that equality legislation has a key role to play in progressing equality. It's the bedrock that we call on as we pursue our ambitions for a more equal society. But at the moment, it's far from a sufficient bedrock. And on balance, in its current form, it's more focused on opportunity than on outcomes. And we need an outcome focus. It's more focused on issues of respect and resources, and some resources at that, than on representation and recognition. And we need a more comprehensive focus on equality. And it's not yet comprehensive in addressing all those who experience inequality. So we need, I think, to be concerned with improving equality legislation to underpin our struggles for greater equality. I think we're meeting at a moment of real potential evolution in our equality legislation, and these moments are rare, and I can only think of two over the last 20 years. However, at each of these two key moments, it was civil society that was the central actor in securing that evolution of the equality legislation and in underpinning its ambition. And that's why I think the discussions today are important, and the engagement of Community Work Ireland and the leadership of Community Work Ireland on this issue is so vital. The first of these key moments of evolution was at a point of real potential when we got the Employment Equality Act in 1999, with its focus on the workplace and its coverage of 9 different grounds. And we got the Equal Status Act with its focus on the provision of goods and services covering the same 9 grounds. And that was a body of legislation that marked, I think, a dramatic attempt to make our equal treatment legislation more comprehensive with its coverage of 9 grounds. For once, we weren't being dragged screaming into action on equality by the European Commission. We actually took a leadership position within the EU on this issue. And that evolution didn't happen at some political whim or as a product of some program for government. It came out of campaigning by civil society. And this campaigning involved developing an agenda for new legislation, with LGB groups partnering with legal expertise to produce a draft bill, and traveller groups likewise partnering with legal expertise to produce a draft bill. And at that point, the silos dropped, the shared agendas became evident, and a coalition for equality legislation was formed around this shared agenda, involving civil society from across most of the grounds. And it was this coalitional power of civil society, informed indeed by legal expertise, that delivered this ambitious body of equality legislation. It was civil society investment of time, creativity, and persistence that secured political commitment, and then secured political ambition, and finally got political action. The second of these key moments of evolution was at a point of destruction 10 years later. The equality infrastructure was effectively dismantled in 2008, with budget cuts of 43% to the Equality Authority and 24% to the Irish Human Rights Commission. It was referred to in a newspaper article at the time as being a quiet coup on the part of officials within the Department of Justice, Equality and Law Reform. But it didn't remain quiet for long, as civil society again took centre stage, mobilising its coalitional power in response. And at that point, the Equality and Rights Alliance was formed and campaigned against the cuts. Then it campaigned for a reversal of the cuts. And ultimately, and most importantly, it campaigned for a rebuilding of our equality infrastructure. And again, it was civil society creativity, campaigning and agenda development, and its investment of time and resources in this work that prompted and secured this next evolution in our equality legislation. In 2014, the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission Act was enacted. This established the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission in place of the Equality Authority and the Irish Human Rights Commission, and evidencing in doing so a commitment to restore the equality infrastructure. But the actual evolution in our equality legislation came with Section 42 of this Act, which provides for a positive duty for equality requiring all public bodies to have regard to the need to eliminate discrimination, promote equality, and protect human rights in implementing all of their functions. And public bodies are now required to be proactive in the pursuit of equality, not just reactive in dealing with incidents and complaints of discrimination. They're required to take a planned and systematic approach to progressing this ambition for non-discrimination, equality, and human rights. And that positive duty had been the central element in the agenda campaigned for by the Equality and Rights Alliance. Looking forward then, it's clear that equality legislation strangely needs energy or it falls into disrepair. And energy comes from its implementation in terms of a sustained critical mass of casework under the Acts. Rights holders drive change in this way, provided they have access to adequate legal and moral support. Energy also comes from evolution of the legislation in terms of new and ambitious requirements and duty bearers. New requirements force equality back onto the agenda of the state, of employers, of service providers, and drive new practice and systems on the part of duty bearers. And at the current moment, I believe our equality legislation is in bad need of new energy. It's in a state of disrepair for lack of enforcement and for lack of evolution. And it's imperative that the current review brings the evolution and is ambitious enough to provide such energy. And history tells us that's only going to happen with civil society pressure. I believe that equality legislation makes a difference. It is worth the investment of time and effort by civil society. We've seen individual casework provoke organizational change. People from across the grounds have been supported and won cases that have led to change in practice and perspective in respondent organizations. And casework has provoked systemic change. Segregation was challenged in casework under the Traveller Grant. Some of the seeds for marriage equality can be seen in casework taken on the Sexual Orientation Grant under the Equal Status Acts, involving discrimination against same-sex partners. A wider imperative to accommodate diversity was advanced in casework under the Race Grant, in particular in relation to language diversity. And then sustained casework on the Gender Grant pointed up the structural nature of pregnancy-related discrimination. I think equality legislation empowers civil society. It's worth the investment of time and effort. A critical mass of casework allied to strategic litigation gives civil society another source of power to apply in seeking change for a more equal society. Legislative provision on equality asserts a value base of diversity, justice, and inclusion, values that all too rarely get an airing in our public or political discourse. And legislative provision on equality sets agreed standards for organizations across society, standards that can be used by civil society to hold these organizations to account. And the potential, ironically, in this power has been strangely evident in the reactive moves made by the state to curtail it over time, because the equality legislation has been undermined over time. It was amended to introduce new exemptions, particularly in relation to nationals from other countries on the basis of their legal status. And that was explicitly to block people in direct provision taking anti-discrimination cases. It was amended to remove licensed premises from its reach, shamefully protecting the vintners from cases being taken by travellers. Legislation was introduced to allow the state to discriminate, particularly in relation to same-sex couples. And in this, it was able to avail of the exemption in the Equal Status Acts for any action taken on foot of legislative provisions. And then, of course, there was the effective dismantling of the equality infrastructure in 2008. So I think this is a battleground and it merits ongoing attention from civil society. The experience of the COVID-19 pandemic has highlighted in very sharp ways the unacceptable inequalities that persist. Civil society voices have been clear that equality should have been and still needs to be more central to the policy responses to the pandemic. High energy and high ambition legislation would have assisted in this. And we are in an era of crises, and equality legislation will therefore only become more important with time. The current review of the equality legislation, I think, does hold potential to be another key moment of evolution, but political commitment is fragile, and civil society, I think, has yet to come onto the field with any force. And we need to invest in this opportunity so that political commitment is strengthened and so that it shifts from commitment to ambition and on to political action. The equality legislation needs new energy. We know it must be more comprehensive. Further grounds are needed. Socioeconomic status is vital in this regard as a new ground, as is the naming of trans people as part of the Gender Grant. We know the legislation has been damaged. Some of the exemptions need to be removed. Central to this would be to remove exemptions that allow discrimination if it is on foot of legislative provisions, and that allow discrimination against migrants and asylum seekers based on their legal status. We know its provisions need to be strengthened. The reasonable accommodation provisions on the disability grounds fall short of UNCRPD requirements, and reasonable accommodation itself could usefully be extended to all of the other grounds in the legislation. We know it has to increase its reach into organisations, requiring systems and practices within organisations that respond effectively to the practical implications of diversity and that advance outcomes of equality. And a statutory duty on the private sector to promote equality would be important and useful. Provisions could extend the type of orders that could be made on foot of a finding of discrimination, so that broader preventative measures could be ordered, and that would be important. So in stepping forward, I think civil society needs to reassemble some of its coalitional power. It needs to put together a focused and shared change agenda, and I hope today can help with that, that emphasizes a comprehensiveness, that emphasizes outcomes, and that emphasizes the issue of recognition and of representation. It needs to bring its creativity to bear in mobilizing support for new ambition in and energy behind our equality legislation, because I don't believe we can wait another 10 years. And now is the moment to act and to secure some change. And I think your contribution is going to be very important in that regard. So thanks for the opportunity, and I hope that was helpful.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Niall, and thank you for your background and also for the very concrete suggestions that you've made for areas that we might discuss and begin to consider. Could I also, just in reminding people about the 99 legislation, remember also the role of Mervyn Taylor, who was the minister in 1997 when we held the presidency of the European Union, who actively facilitated, pushed by Irish civil society, who actively facilitated the passage of the legislation through the Council of Justice Ministers at that particular point in time. So I just feel it's worth remembering that, and also remembering the role that a number of you played throughout the 90s to try and get that European legislation together. So, Niall, you're talking about a number of things there. You're talking about the need for collective action, but you're also talking about the need for examining exemptions, increasing the reach, extending the areas, looking at a statutory duty for the private sector, looking at new areas, and looking also at outcomes and at recognition. All crucially important, and all things that I think everybody around this room will have views about. And did I see your hand up? Did you want to come in there?
No, I was clapping. I mean, I heard Niall speak at the IRIC event, which is why we begged him to come along today, because I just think it's a really comprehensive overview, and you've just summed it up there again, Stacia. So yeah, good start for our discussion. Thanks so much, Niall.
Okay, so given the shortage of time, can we just take initial reactions maybe and questions to Niall, because he's just with us for the hour, so there may be things that you would like further clarification or development of. So initial reactions and further questions to Niall, maybe to begin with. John. You need to unmute there, John. You still need to, oh, you're grand, yeah.
Yes, no, listen to Niall there certainly brought a lot of stuff back to me in the years past, and certainly brought us up to where we are today with the pandemic climate and what's happening in the ground. I had the opportunity over the last couple of months, just when we got a bit of freedom from the lockdown and pandemic, to actually Zoom meet or meet face to face with a number of the different groups and campaigns that I'm involved in. I got involved in a campaign there just recently in the last couple of weeks, and it's a group that have set up in Dublin South Central. What they have done, and within a matter of weeks, they organised a Zoom meeting in Dublin South Central, inviting the TDs, senators, and members of the public. and that was quite a success. And other groups as well, and other campaigners. There seems to be a new energy about at the moment. And I would agree with Niall. I think the pandemic and the climate change has forced us to think about where we're going, why we're going there, and what we're going there for, and what must be done. I think there's a new emphasis now within people, and I suppose I'll use the word awakening, that hasn't been there for some time. And it seems to be right across organizations and groups and people that have never moved in those directions before. As I said, in a number of meetings that I have been at the other day, that most of the groups and organizations and individuals that I have heard speaking may come about it from a different way. Their communications may seem different, but we all now seem to be talking the one language. In the 21st century, due to climate change and the pandemic, it has shown us how short the opportunity is for us all to become involved in what Niall said is a coalition of all the groups that are now moving on the ground.
John, can I ask you if there's a particular question you have that you might put it, because I'm a bit anxious about the time.
Yes. How do we move forward on this issue? And I think this is an important issue, because most of the groups that I have been in, we haven't discussed this, and this is important of what going forward, because within the legislation, it covers the points that most people were making. Okay. We have to have our rights sealed under legislation in order to go forward on any of the campaigns.
Okay, thanks very much, John. Anna, followed by Catherine.
Thanks, Stacia, and I'll be really quick. I suppose in this question to Niall, and again, thanks for such an amazing overview in such a short space of time. And again, I suppose it's about being conscious of the range of issues, trying to think again, you know, if Niall, it's like being asked to be directed, what can we most usefully put our effort to, like where are the points in the system, if you like, that our input maybe or can have most impact. And I suppose what I'm thinking of is, I know in our situation, like you're looking, when people in any situation look at anything to do with the law and legal rights, there's one piece is having them, and I suppose that's the work about, you know, changing the actual legislation, removing some of the restriction, all the things you were talking about. But the other thing then, which is the general experience we have, is that simply the complete people just being faced with having to engage with anything legal or the legal system, it's just no, you know, the barriers, the almost impossibility, just anything. And just people are advised to, even when they're told you do have that right, but just don't, they get official advice basically saying, yeah, but you're right. So I think for us, that's a huge element, is how do you build up that capacity, given all, obviously there are shortcomings in the law, and that's one clear part that we have to identify those and ask for change, but that building up capacity of people or of organizations who are working with people or whoever to actually be able to see their way through. How do we start unpicking this, what is the legal system in effect and the way it works? I know it's a bit of a big question, but just if there's specific things that might start unlocking bits of that, I don't know, now it'd be good because you've such expertise on it.
Okay, Niall, we're not going to let you off the hook at all today. There's no Catherine maybe, and Sarah, and then we'll go back to Niall, and then we'll move on again.
Great. This isn't letting you off the hook. It's not putting you on hook either, Niall. So there you go. I guess one of the things that really stood out for me, because I'm a bit in the what's this, can't see the wood from the trees at the moment around a few different things. So it's that very obvious, but very clearly articulated shift from opportunity to outcome. And I'm really struck by what you're saying, of course, that of course it is civil society that creates the change in the first place, no matter what we hear in terms of the mantra of everything happening from the top and top level leadership. I'm completely with John's optimism. Lovely to see you, John. I'm also in Chapel Islip, so I might cross our paths. But I'm going to enter the space of barriers right now. I think we obviously all are aware that civil society is one group, but there's other actors who will be part of this consultation with vested interests. So I'll be asking two questions that are linked. One, how do you think we propose or make real that shift from opportunity, but now actually to outcome? Mindful, for example, that if we're looking at outcomes, the benefit of naming it is that it then gets measured. But I am aware in some of the conversations that I have been in is that the new awareness of data, people can use it now to say we don't have the data, so we can't be doing that. In my experience of equality legislation, things were named and then the steps were taken to get it. So for example, data. And I'm just really always struck by that thing. Once it makes sense, it's listened to, even if it's not accurate. So my fear is that people say we don't have the data. Well, that's logical, isn't it? And so it won't happen. So sorry, long-winded, but basically, how do we shift from outcome to opportunity, and how in doing so predict the resistance that's going to be there so we can name it in our submissions?
Okay.
Anyway, clear, Neil? Yeah, thanks.
Opportunity to outcome, I think, Catherine, in the last bit. But Sarah Ferrigan.
Hello, you can hear me. Thank you so much for that fantastic presentation there. What kind of jumped out at me is the socio-economic status as a 10th ground, and we've been very lucky. Recently, we secured IREC funding for to do a 5-year anti-poverty strategy for County Clare, and we were very lucky to engage the services of Conor McCabe. He's fantastic, and he's looking through all the current, plans and legislations and all that kind of stuff, and from national development plans to local plans. And I guess how my question would be like, how can we ensure that this becomes a 10th ground for discrimination, and how can we ensure that this legislation becomes something that feeds into like national development plans, local, county development plans, your local economic and community plans. That's basically, the importance of having that as a 10th ground. How can we push that forward? Because really it is something, like under all the other 9 grounds, you can end up getting socially excluded and economically excluded. And I reiterate, Anna, as well about, when somebody's socially excluded, economically excluded, it's very difficult for them to self-advocate when discrimination actually occurs to them. So I think it's really important that's part of it. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Neil. Thanks very much, Sarah. We'll go back to you now, Neil, and then we'll move again.
Okay. I mean, that issue of legal knowledge and legal expertise, all right, it's a bit like economics in a way, in terms of as soon as you hear the word, you turn off and go into some area you're more comfortable with. And yet, if we don't engage in economics or the legal field, we're missing some of the key levers for change or spaces for change. I think that first of all is our own legal expertise and our own legal capacity. And I think that's where coalitional power is so important, and coalition building is so important. That if we think back to the 1990s when we campaigned for the legislation, we had very good allies, legal allies that were part of the coalition for change there, and that interchange was quite useful. It's not an easy alliance because there are two very different perspectives, so you have to work at that alliance, but it was really important. Then at a more micro level, in terms of legal expertise, to be able to legally challenge something, that is a real barrier, all right. And I just was flicking through the concerns people had. A lot of them are around access to justice, all right, and the issue of access to justice. I think we need to look for some changes in the legislation to improve access to justice. There is a real barrier there. I agree with Anna. One of the things is there should be free legal aid available for people taking cases under the legislation. People should be able to take class actions, not just individual actions, but on behalf of groups. And all cases should be heard in the WRC. Having to go to the district court is really problematic and is a further jump up and barrier in relation to that. So I think there are simple things we can seek in this reform to improve access. I'd also like to see IREC support a greater range and number of cases, because I think that's the role of the equality body. But you can't legislate for that. That's a strategy issue and a question issue. But I think coalition building, number one, and then some reforms in terms of legal aid, class actions, and access to the WRC. In relation to the shift from opportunity to outcome, I don't buy the data as a barrier thing, and I know you don't either, Catherine, but it just gets thrown at you in a way, and I think we just have to avoid that in a way. I think the big shift from opportunity to outcome is there in the public sector duty, in the requirement on the public body, not just to eliminate discrimination, but to promote equality of opportunity. So it says equality of opportunity, but it's not non-discrimination, so it's something more. It's closer to outcomes, and certainly the IRIC guidance is focusing on outcomes in that regard. But we need to see an improvement. I think Paul raised the issue of lethargy in implementing the public sector duty. We need to see an improvement in this reform in the sanctions regime around the public sector duty. It needs to be possible to enforce it, either through judicial review or through some actual sanctions that IRIC could apply where it's not being implemented. I do think that's important in relation to that. But public duties or positive duties are crucial in that shift to outcome. And I do think, and there are examples across Europe of positive duties also being applied to the private sector. It wouldn't be the same, but it'd be a smaller scale one in terms of there tend to be equality planning duties requiring private sector bodies to have equality action plans in place. And I don't see why that shouldn't happen here as well. Then in terms, I do agree that socioeconomic status ground is crucial. There is no doubt that introducing a new ground will inject massive energy into the legislation in terms of people using it, in terms of employers looking at it and trying to gear up to it, in terms of service providers, in terms of the state. There is no doubt that this reform will depend on revision to the grounds. Socioeconomic status is a huge missing ground. There's no doubt about that. I think trans does need to be named as part of the gender ground. You can take cases under the gender ground, but without being named, it's a real barrier in that way. But I think that will give it new energy, and that's very important. And there, what's been thrown up is the whole issue of definition in that way. And again, it's a false block in a way. It's a bit like the data one, that it's been used. We'll find examples across Europe where socioeconomic status ground is covered. It's defined in a whole range of different ways. It takes a little while to settle down, but once it's settled down, people knows what it means and it gets operational. That was the same when they introduced new grounds in 1999 as well. It's no different now in that way. Didn't stop them then, it shouldn't stop them now. And I do think that will be hugely important. In terms of getting it into plans, the public sector duty already requires it to be part of plans, part of LECPs, part of any public plan, any plan that a public authority is involved in has to implement the public sector duty. It's not happening, and that's why the sanctions regime around the public sector duty could usefully be strengthened. I do think in terms of navigating that fear of the legal in a way, that we can build an agenda that's very practical, and we don't have to get involved in the legal nitty-gritty. Leave that to FLAC and others to do that. But we can talk about the socioeconomic status ground. We can talk about the public sector duty and the private sector duty and better reasonable accommodation of disabled people and a reasonable accommodation of people across other diversities and the other grounds, and better access to justice in terms of access to legal aid and things like that these aren't legal concepts. These are legal, but they are deeply practical and based on people's experience.
Thanks, Niall. And they certainly don't always require a huge amount of legal expertise in order to articulate the need for them. I'm just going to throw in something myself. I'm a bit tired of the Workplace Relations Commission being the body responsible. I know you're all going to say there's nothing you can do about that, but I far prefer the term Equality Tribunal because I think I would like to see something that actually related to the breadth of the legislation that's available. But please don't comment on that, anyone, because I'm told this is a no-no for this review. But maybe if you agree with me, just stick it into your submissions anyway. Paul, you're next, I think. You're not, are you not? Sorry, it's my hand that's up there, is it? You need to unmute.
No, I didn't put my hand up, no.
Oh, did you not? Oh, I'm very sorry. It was that little hand that moves around my screen. I'm sorry about that. Anybody else like to come in at this stage?
I'll come in there, Stacia, if that's okay. I was just wondering about the because I remember when we were campaigning for the Equal Status Acts in the 90s, the engagement we had with the vintners and the fights and all the meetings, and well, certainly I did anyway at the local level, meetings with pub owners, and this include my own local pub owner. But anyway, you know, there was a lot of, we focused quite a bit of our attention on the opponents of the Act. And I'm just wondering now, is that, I mean, who's out there? There's people, you talked about the equality ground as a battleground, and so is it the state? Is it, who are the players, I suppose, who are the actors now who are opposing this? Maybe it's obvious, maybe it's still the vintners and those, but like, who are the opposers, or the people that need to be, we need to have in our sights? And then in terms of the socioeconomic ground, how is that defined? So is it about education, social class and income and occupation? Is that it? Where would prisoners, for example, or ex-prisoners come in? Would they be covered by that or not? Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Rachel. Are there other questions? Any other quick questions for Niall? I'm just a bit conscious of your time, Niall, and of using it as well as we can. Our comments?
Jacinta there.
Jacinta, sorry.
Yeah, I suppose just as well around the access to justice, I suppose it's not even just that people are put off to engage with the system actively discriminates against them if you're a traveller, if you're an undocumented migrant. So in terms of people with those significant barriers of that real fear of engaging with the legal system and a justice system that, you know, could deport you or, you know, profiles you every day when you walk down the street, depending on where you live and what area. So I suppose, yeah, I know, Niall, you said like other options are like class action suits and not just individuals needing to take on cases, but I suppose other mechanisms there to protect those groups who, you know, individually maybe aren't going to be able to take on these kind of individual cases. So I'm just wondering.
Good question, Jacinta. And there's something I'll add to that later. Niall.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, Rachel, in terms of who are the opponents, and I think it's a marker of the loss of energy of the legislation that you have to ask the question in a way that the key focus at the moment is the state and politicians in particular. I think in terms of, I think the political commitment is really watery in relation to this reform. I get absolutely no sense of purpose around it at all. There might be some limited agenda there, but it's very limited and it's so lethargic. It's really worrying. So I think the key focus has to be politicians and the state, the department in particular, to up the ambition and to move from that commitment to some sort of ambition and to some sort of action. There's a real danger. They've done this before in terms of you review and you review your review and you publish your review and then you carry on and do nothing. To turn this into action is going to be quite a struggle, and it's the state and the politicians that are going to be the key target. I think we do need to mobilize other actors. I think the trade unions need to be a bit more vocal about it in particular, but I think civil society, first and foremost, have to be really articulate on it and really noisy about it as well, to show that it is an issue and there is a demand. The socioeconomic status ground, there's some useful definitions out there. The Equality Rights Alliance did a publication and put forward a definition. It needs to be defined asymmetrically in terms of disadvantage, or if it's to work. We're not in the business of preventing rich people from discrimination. So it's looking at defining it in terms of disadvantage, and it is in terms of, could be educational or accommodation or economic disadvantage. And I can't remember the exact definition in the Equality Rights Alliance publication, but it worked, and I think that would do. It doesn't necessarily cover ex-prisoners, and certainly in the past in the Equality, we recommended an additional ground in terms of discrimination on the basis of criminal conviction, and I don't see why that shouldn't be part of the agenda now as well. I mean, I think if we're going to be comprehensive, it should be comprehensive in that way. There is fear of taking action, but you know, the most litigious group, and I say that with absolute respect, were at the start when the Equal Status Act came in first, were travellers, and they were very, very active in bringing cases against pubs. Really fantastic work. Now, when it moved into the district court, that absolutely just disappeared. And that shows the importance of an accessible venue and the WRC. And yes, I agree with Stacia about the name, but we need to be sure that the WRC is an accessible venue. And I think legal aid will help that, class actions will help that. The support of civil society organizations was crucial at the time as well, in terms of helping people to take cases. But people were able to do it with the right supports and the right venue. And we shouldn't forget that, all right, even though, yeah, I agree that the system isn't necessarily that friendly.
Okay. Thanks, Niall. I'm conscious now that Miriam has a question up there, I think. You're on.
Thanks for that. And I just a quick comment, really, I suppose, in terms of supports to, you know, for people to access justice, like civil society, I suppose, working on the ground, we would have been funded for advocacy. And that's something that's sort of not a word that government doesn't seem to like anymore, and something that's not really funded. And in terms of representation, I think it is really, really important that we, you know, advocacy is recognised and also that it's funded.
Absolutely, Miriam, and thanks very much for that. Two additional comments, Niall, I would throw along the side. I fully agree with your concern about sort of lethargy on the state side and about the lack of activity overall, and the concern to just get through this somehow and get it out of the way. And I think that one of the things that may be used there is COVID and the need to recover from COVID, and that may be used as a way to just get this thing done. And the importance of actually ensuring that that doesn't happen was one of the things I was wondering if you'd comment on. The other thing is, I'm personally really fed up to the two teeth of this concern of the discrimination against asylum seekers. And I think maybe there's a need to be clever in the use of international soft law, including ICERD and the ICCPR, for example, both of which would be very clear that you can't treat people, people cannot be exposed to racism, irrespective of their status in a country. And I think maybe we need to push the boat out and start invoking some of those in challenging maybe some of the provisions and the revisions that have been made to the equality legislation over the years. There are just two. There were another few that I can't just quite remember at the moment. Anyway, Niall, over to you. Is there anyone else who would like to add any comment to Niall at this stage?
I'm going to have to zoom in a minute. I'm really sorry, because I had a thing at 2. Yeah.
Do you want to go ahead, Niall, then? Do you want to just respond briefly?
Yeah, no, I agree with you, Stacey. I think we should, I mean, that exemption in relation to people on the basis of legal status and the Equal Status Act is a disgrace. And it was deliberately put in because at the time the Equality Authority had launched a case in relation to social welfare provision in direct provision centres. And it is absolutely counter to international conventions, all right. And I think we should be able to call on ICERD in relation to that, just as we should be able to call on UNCRPD in terms of the very poor provision for reasonable accommodation of disabled people under the Equal Status Acts as well. I think that would be important to do, all right, yeah.
Okay, Niall, I'm conscious that you need to go. Are there some closing comments that you'd like to make, maybe? Because I think that might be the best way to give us a final of your time.
Yeah, no, happy to help with any next steps, and I promise not to have a Zoom tied up behind whatever the next meeting might be, so apologies for that. But I do think, focus on the big issues in terms of new grounds, socioeconomic status, criminal conviction, trans people. Focus on access, legal provision, class cases, in legal aid provision, and class cases in particular, and the orders that the WRC can make. If we could strengthen those, that would be really important as well. Focus on the positive duties, extending them to the private sector, having sanctions in relation to them. And then there are clear improvements around the area of reasonable accommodation that we could look for that would benefit all of the grounds as well. So I think getting an agenda like that, but having that shared agenda as well, whatever the other bits we might each want to add on to it, but having a shared core to our agendas could be really important, because if we're going to get over that lethargy, it does need some loud, consistent and coherent voices, all right. So hopefully that can happen, and very happy to be part of it.
Thank you very much, Niall, and good luck with your next Zoom. All right, everybody. We have, I think, Anne, you said about 15 minutes. Is that right? Is she gone?
Oh, sorry, I'm nodding to you, but you probably can't see me. I have my thumb up. Yes, about another 15 minutes.
We have about another 15 minutes. So, and Niall has already given us a very sort of clear overview, and also a very clear guidance, I think, in terms of where we might go in terms of new grounds, in terms of, both in terms of access and class cases, collective cases, which indeed I think are really important for an organisation like CWI, like the work that all of you are involved in, like positive duties for the private sector. I think in that case, we could also refer to the whole human rights and business agenda that the state has been in such a galloping race to sign up to and do nothing about. And then improving reasonable accommodation, and then thinking also about doing all of this in a collective and in a shared way. So we have a starting point agenda and a number of direct ideas that all or any of you might use in your own submission. So final comments maybe from everybody as to how we might proceed from here. John, I see your hand up.
You're on mute there, John.
You're muted, John.
There we are. Now, the fear of taking legal action. Well, in my experience since 2008, with the collapse in the economy and people being evicted, I spent 10 years in and out of court with individuals and groups who had no access to legal representation in order to save their homes, and had to take the cases themselves with support from the back, from legal people and other people. As well as that, in the last couple of years, due to the change in the planning procedure in local authorities, where they have totally and absolutely tore up the contract with the citizens, which is the what do you call it, the local development plans, the city plan or the council plan, and they have delegated their responsibility in planning to on board Planola. Now, there's been numerous judicial reviews.
John, I'm sorry, John, but I'm going to stop you there, because to be quite honest with you, while I absolutely agree with you that there's a link between planning and the legal action you're talking about,
no, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about people in communities, and people per se are no longer in fear of taking legal action. They're setting up their own funds in their own communities to do so.
Great. That's very helpful. That's very helpful, because our focus now for the next 15 minutes has to be on getting our brain in gear about trying to make submissions to the equal status legislation review. And that's very helpful, John, that people can do this and have done it, and there's experience of having done it, and it's worked or not worked. People have it and are not afraid of it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
So can I just ask a question, just for, if we were all to go away and write individual ones, would it be a good idea, like say for somewhere like Donegal, for us to do a collective submission, do you think, Stacia or Anne or Rachel, that drawing on the conversation today and in relation to all the areas that we work on in terms of equality and human rights in the county?
I don't know if you mean a collective submission.
Yeah, we bring together like organisations like Donegal Intercultural Platform, you know, the Think Equality Project, the local development companies, that we try and get people together really fast, brainstorm, and a few of us go away and make a submission from the county, you know, the People with Disabilities organisation, you know, that we do one to make sure we get something.
I think that might be very effective, but there isn't an awful lot of time. And I thought
that's what I'm thinking. That's the everybody. Otherwise, we will never get all the organisations to write one each. So somebody like ourselves took the lead and got the others to sign up to it.
I know the way recently that was done in another set of organisations nationally for the UPR was to actually, someone took the the initiative and wrote something and said, okay, you know, how do the other organizations feel about this? And then there were comments on it and that sort of thing. But the suggestion he was making earlier in this regard, I thought was more a coalition of all of you to consider something of this nature, but I may be wrong. Anna, have you your hand up? And then I think Paul.
Just really quickly, say just something I'm thinking myself, because obviously we're a network, and I'm just thinking it's been really useful because, again, an issue like this, when you've so much on your agenda, you're inclined to think, yeah, well, you know, that's a bit too much for it's extra. But it's fascinating because just listening, I'm thinking what I'm going to do now in my own head even is start to think about the number of occasions, even in the past 6 months, that actually we've been confronted with situations where people clearly have rights under this various forms of legislation that have been breached, and we've been in a situation where people just say, oh, surely there's nothing you can do, or maybe, and just literally be practical and start looking at what are the day-to-day situations we're constantly meeting where this would be extremely relevant, and then trying to think a little bit about some of the suggestions that Niall has put forward there. Say particularly interested in the class action, the socioeconomic state is crucial, but even just literally drawing up from our own experience and the kind of extent to which, though even a few of those changes would make a real difference, and just try and produce a submission based on that. Because I think when you think it is very, very practical, you know, you start off thinking, oh, this is huge, can't cope, too much work. But when you start to think about it, it's things that are going on every single day actually are linked into this. And yeah, no, it's kind of given me a really good focus for putting something together. So thanks a million for that.
Very welcome. Thanks. Thanks for that, Anne. Paul, did you have your hand up?
Just briefly, I mean, when Siobhan made that comment about at county level and Donegal, I was actually writing down at county level question mark. I do think it's worthwhile. I appreciate that time is really, really short, but that idea of a collaborative coming together, whether it's around a theme, whether it's the geography or relationships between organizations, I do think it's worthwhile. It's daunting when you look at the range and Anne's opening comments and the information you got through FLAC. It sort of seems, you know, beyond an individual's capacity to understand that or make submissions. But maybe that idea of a smaller group discussion would help, and I would certainly be prepared to be part of that at the Donegal level. That's it.
Thanks very much, Paul. Laurie, I see your hand up, I think.
Hi, Anastasia. Sorry, I've just been listening because I have to say I feel like I'm not up to scratch on everything that's being talked about today. But something that I would like to just put out there is that, is there a way that we could ask what public data stats or sets are actually capturing data? What questions are actually being asked by public services? Like, for example, CICAP originally did have, and I mean, that was questionable. Have you ever been discriminated against? And okay, that I think largely may not have been used after that sense of being asked that question, because we couldn't actually solve that issue. But what public bodies are actually asking people now, have you been experiencing discrimination in the recent, you know, who's asking the question? And could we actually ask for that to be asked, review that somehow? You're better at summing that up than I would be.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get my header.
Yeah, it's just I don't think we capture that data anymore, and probably that on one hand that is good because we could never really solve the problem, but on another hand, is that discriminatory in itself? Is that as a result of lack of I suppose lack of response?
I think a number of, for example, the minority organizations are looking for disaggregated data and ethnic equality monitoring across, and perhaps anything that we refer to or gets referred to might consider that as part of it.
Yeah, I suppose the old-fashioned proofing that used to happen and the evaluation of data for proofing, what has happened, that doesn't happen.
Well, to tell the truth, we never did proper ethnic equality monitoring, and we didn't disaggregate data enough. But certainly it's something that we could say would be essential to perform any review. I mean, if it's when it's going forward.
Yeah, it's like what gaps are there? Maybe we need to highlight what isn't there.
That's true.
I'll shut up now. Thank you.
No, that's very helpful. Marianne, I see you, and then I also see Anne.
Hi, just. Oh, go ahead, Anne.
No, I'm just saying go first, Marianne.
Oh, sorry, thank you. Sorry, I'm jumping in late. Sorry, because I was doing something else, but it's really useful conversation. And it's just kind of building on what Laurie was saying, and maybe it's been discussed, but I think there's the sense of listening to what people are saying. It's around, on the one hand, like reinvigorating and the action of promoting equality. For me, that's what I'm hearing about what you're saying, Laurie, in the measurement of what the, you know, I think asking that question of just actually doing a thing on equality with students just before I came in, but asking the question about the experience of discrimination supposes an understanding of the experience of discrimination. And I think that there is something about the possibility of this coming together, of re-energizing the sector, re-energizing civil society to respond to that. And there's the bit of the collective getting the request in, but it becomes the possibility to create the conditions for people to better understand that discrimination, and almost linking in with them. Saying that builds in capacity again of people to recognize civil society to respond, to promote equality, as well as to recognise the discriminatory acts, I suppose.
You're on mute, Stacia. You're gone on mute.
We've got 10 minutes flat in which to finalise our discussions. And
2 minutes. We've 2 minutes flat.
And decide on next collective steps, if any. There's a couple of suggestions on the table, one of a coalition suggestion from Donegal, and the suggestion that Niall had on the table was some sort of joint action by everybody. And the area that we're explicitly talking about at the moment is our response individually or collectively, or however we manage to do it, to the review of the equality legislation, which is indeed a very important review. Anne.
Yeah, just on the next steps, just to say to people that when it comes to these types of submissions, numbers matter. So to try and get a critical mass of submissions in is important. And I think they can be at different levels. So as Paul said, whether they're thematic or geographically based, I think, you know, if you are individual. So from individuals, more importantly from organizations, then from groups of organizations or collectives, and then finally from perhaps an alliance that might come out of this. One of the things that we can probably commit to from a CWI perspective, because we have to do it anyway, I'll commit Rachel to writing it, but I'm joking, just we'll commit to fairly snappily getting some sort of template or some sort of framework out to people that they can then follow, and they can use at your different levels, because I think it is really important to do the different levels bit. And the other thing I will say about submissions, and this is from experience, is they don't need to be huge. Honestly, they don't. And the people reviewing the submissions want to get to the heart of them. So lead with the heart, and don't worry about quoting research from here, because there are experts to do that. So like, it's our job, I think, to get to the heart of the matter. And the more of us getting to the heart of the matter, more submissions that go in from the different levels, I think is really important. But we will try and get some sort of framework and some sort of note, you know, of the meeting discussion out to people, because that might frame your own responses. And we will have the recording available ASAP over the next couple of days. We'll have that recording up on the website, and we'll send people an email to let you know when it is up on the website.
Okay, Anne, so the final bit of this then, the final question is, if CWI does a draft, if an overall draft, are other people interested in signing up to such an overall, a framework? Yes, absolutely crucial. A note on today, absolutely crucial. What Niall was suggesting was that in some way we made a collective statement about this review. And I'm just wondering, I think the only way that could be done would be by someone, and I'm looking at Rachel and Anne, I'm afraid. The only way it could be done would be by one or two people producing an overall draft, which wouldn't cover all of the things that everybody wants covered, but would cover some of the key things that we've been discussing during the afternoon. I don't know what you feel about that, and I don't know, Rachel and Anne, what either of you might feel about that either.
Yeah, no, I think it's, you know, it has to be done. We have to do it. Yeah, so we'll certainly commit to that.
Would people welcome that?
Yeah, I think that would, sorry, I had my hand up. I think that would be really useful, because there is so much, and to have a framework to work from, and then they're then seeing the same things, the same issues repeated over and over again.
Yeah.
By different, as Anne said, numbers are important.
And
so
what about the bit, Miriam, of an overall statement then that would more or less repeat the whole lot.
Yeah, you know, that Anne was saying about that they'll put out a template, that you're willing to put out a template. I think that would be really useful, because then if we're talking about the issues that Niall outlined this morning and the stuff that has come up, if all of us are saying that and then putting in what we're saying from our own organisations as well.
Okay, that's grand.
So
we can do both.
It's repeated over and over again.
Yeah, and we can also do a collective one, so that we're getting people to sign up to this collective one, and then people just get in their own as well.
And I think that's what I was going to say as well. We'd be absolutely delighted to sign up to the collective one.
And then like Niall kindly, as he was leaving, said that he would be willing to help with this. So I think we kind of try and draw Niall back in again to give us a hand with putting that together.
Much better idea.
So yeah, and the other thing is the other bit of the strategy. So the submissions are one thing, but the other bit is how do we get at the politicians in the state? Because that's the bit that Niall was talking about as well. That's our battleground, if you like, is with the politicians, from the local councillors to the senators to the TDs and the cabinet. So how are we going to kind of infiltrate and, you know, show that there is a groundswell of interest in this and a commitment to kind of seeing it through? So we need a second strategy, I suppose, with regard to that, but maybe that's for another day, because in the first instance we have to get these in by the 8th, but I just think we need to think about the other as well.
And I think you're right, Rachel. I do think we need to get it in, but we also do need a strategy for how we get it out there. And I suppose in the same way that you would with your pre-budget submissions or whatever, that, like, I know we would always get the 17 projects would circulate those to all their local TDs and representatives. So
are people happy with that then? That makes a lot of sense, and it might be the subject of another meeting. Is there anyone else here? I'm conscious there are people, because this was a bit of a galloping race. There are people who have been here for the whole time and haven't had a chance to say anything. You have to talk awful quick around here, I'm afraid. So is there anything those of you who didn't have a chance to say anything would like to say at this stage?
I'd like to endorse the last suggestion. I think it's very worthwhile, and I'm glad to be included in it, and I will do some homework.
Thanks very much, Imelda. Thank you. Anybody else that hasn't had a chance to say anything so far?
Just really quickly on that, because I am conscious that people were dragged in from different places or invited from different places to come to today's meeting. If you're not a CWI member, sign up today. It's really easy. Just go on the website and sign up today, because we will be keeping, it's mostly to our membership database that we'll be keeping people up to date and asking people ultimately to sign up to the submission. And just have your logos ready to send to us.
Thanks very much. And Deirdre Grealish, I think you have your hand up, or maybe not.
Yeah, just briefly, thanks very much, Anastasia. I have never been to a meeting. I'm not a CWI, and the only thing I feel like I can add to it is, as you said there, the state and the politicians are targets here. Their only interest, the politicians certainly, are to get re-elected. So if they know that the people in their constituency feel very strongly about this, they will act accordingly. So I think it's social media, it's Facebook, it's the local radio stations, it's and as I said as well earlier, as Anne said, it's numbers of submissions rather than, you know, this a Donegal collective is an excellent idea, but within those groups they should all send their own submissions, and every individual within that group should send submissions, and it's a matter of bombardment. Everywhere they look, everywhere they turn, they see it, they hear it. That's, you know, and then you have the politicians, whether that's the state. I don't know how to get there. I don't know if anyone knows how to get through there.
I think we're acknowledging that if we get the first bit done, there might be another meeting.
Yes.
There might, or some mechanism for discussing who to target at the next stage and who are the most crucial people to target and how do we actually get to them. Right, unless there's anybody else who has something that they wish to say, I'll just briefly hand back to Anne and Rachel before closing the meeting.
I mean, I'm not sure there's anything I want to add. I think it was a really good session. Thank you so much, everybody, for A, coming along, and B, engaging in such a very valuable exchange of ideas. I think, yeah, we will follow up. We will follow up ASAP. We're very conscious of time. And to thank Niall for his contribution, but also to thank yourself, Stacia, for chairing and bringing everything together and managing to sum up as you do so well. So thanks, everybody.
You're welcome, Rachel. Seeing as how you added another leg to this, going after the
Sorry,
public.
no. Just again, to thank everybody. I'm not going to delay anybody by saying any more. So just thank you, and looking forward to kind of continued engagement with you on this issue into the future as well. So thank you.
Well, thanks very much, everybody. I think it's been a very useful hour and a half nearly, and I feel much more enthusiastic about this review than I did at the start of the meeting. I think that itself is a good point for anything either individual or collective we might do. I also feel that I think Niall's comment that things are possible. Yes, things are possible if we decide to be clear about what we're asking and decide we have the right to ask them, and decide that we also have enough knowledge to do it. And I think that with the knowledge that you all have, we certainly do have enough knowledge to do it. And as I think John was saying earlier on, we also have the capacity to engage with all of the different sectors that need to be engaged with. So thanks very much, everybody, and have a good afternoon.
Thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.